What's going on, everybody, and welcome to CS5 Unmasked. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made the Jason costume from the Friday the 13th Vengeance fan film, and I'm going to show you how I did it on a budget. Needless to say, thrift stores and yard sales were an absolute must to ensure that I kept the cost down when I made the costume. Now, if you're curious on how much I actually spent, stay tuned to the end of the video to find out. So, sit back and relax, and welcome to CS5's Cost Cut Costume Tutorials. Alright, let's go ahead and see what we're going to need for this costume. We're going to need a mask and a hood, a reddish-brown undershirt, an olive-green long-sleeved work shirt, a utility belt with assorted weapons, a pair of leather gloves, a brown pair of pants, and some black work boots. We'll start off with the olive-green work shirt and the reddish-brown undershirt. Both of these shirts I did pick up at the Goodwill, and I paid about $2 a piece for them. Alright, let's go ahead and darken up the shirts. Now, using a bucket, I'm going to use a couple gallons of warm water and approximately 2 ounces of black acrylic paint. Okay, now that the solution's all mixed up, I'm going to go ahead and place each one of the shirts into the bucket. I'm going to agitate them quite a bit just to ensure that all the air has been pushed out and all of that black water solution has the ability to penetrate the fibers. Now, after a heavy amount of agitation, I let the shirt sit in the bucket for about 2 hours. And then I went and removed them from the water and proceeded to wring them out a few times, ensuring that I got as much water solution out as possible. And then placed them on some hangers so they can air dry overnight. Now, while those are drying, let's go ahead and move over to the pants. Now, these are just a pair of brown pants that I actually used for my Never Hike Alone costume, so I'm just going to reuse them for this costume. These were a yard sale purchase, and it only cost me $1. Using a can of black spray paint, I'm going to go over the entire pair of pants. I'm going to darken them up to make them look extremely dingy and dirty. Now that the shirts have dried overnight, I'm going to place them on my mannequin and proceed to mark out all of the locations of the rips and tears. There's an excessive amount of damage I need to cause to this shirt, so there was 2 particular videos that I actually did reference. One was the fan film itself, where Jason comes in contact with all of the prisoners outside doing road cleanup. And the other was a behind the scenes video of the same clip. I found that the behind the scenes video was actually a better reference, because not only were you able to see Jason's front, you were also able to see the back of the shirt. Now, there was actually quite a bit of detail here, and I'm very lucky that I stumbled upon this video. Using a black Sharpie, I just went over the entire front and back, marking out where all the damage that I noticed on the videos. And then using a pair of scissors, I just proceeded to cut them out, trying to be careful not to cut the undershirt, because that has a different type of damage and I didn't want to cause any more than it was required. There was so much damage I actually had to do to this costume, and after a little while it actually started becoming a whole lot more fun than I actually anticipated. But I didn't want to get too carried away because I still wanted to make it look more accurate to the movie rather than my own interpretation. And not only was there an excessive amount of damage, I also had to remember to put the fence post holes in Jason's shirt that he actually received back in part 6. Now, using a wire brush, I went over the entire shirt, making sure I hit every single cut, every single pocket, and every single seam, including the collar. I really wanted to give this an extremely distressed look, and a wire brush actually accomplishes that. Alright, now moving on to the undershirt. Using a Sharpie, I'm just going to go ahead and mark out where all the damage is located while the overshirt is actually on. Therefore, the placement is going to be accurate to the one that's in the fan film. I'm going to do this on the front and the back. Alright, now that everything's marked up, I went ahead and took the shirt off the mannequin, and now I'm going to go ahead and proceed to create the rips and the tears. Alright, now we're going to add a little bit more detail to this undershirt. Now, there is a few spots on the shirt that you can clearly see parts of Jason's rotted flesh and bone. That's on the lower part of the neck and upper chest, and on his upper back, just below his neck and head. So to create the rotted flesh, I'm just going to use some scraps off of an old gray towel and just hot glue it to the inside of the shirt. And then I'm just going to take a black Sharpie and just add a few lines and some extra detail. To darken it up a little bit more, I went ahead and just added a little bit of diluted black paint to complete the look. Okay, to create the exposed bone and rotted flesh on his upper back, I'm going to be using this old raggedy t-shirt that I used to help me clean up painting mistakes. I'm going to start by cutting out a large section and then proceed to draw out the exposed bone. And then now I'm just going to cut it out and see what it actually looks like. Alright, that doesn't look too bad. So now I'm just going to hot glue it to a piece of that old gray towel that I had from earlier. And now I'm just going to take a red Sharpie and just go over the outline of the bones. This is going to add just a little bit more detail, so it's going to be a whole lot more noticeable on the back of the costume. Once that's complete, I'm going to take a black Sharpie and just add separation lines for each one of the vertebrae. And now using the red Sharpie again, I'm just going to highlight the separation lines to add just a little bit more detail. And now I'm just going to cut it out and then hot glue it to the back of the shirt the exact same way that I did to the front. Alright, now we're going to move on to the utility belt and weapons. I was able to pick this up at the Goodwill several years back for my Jason Part 6 costume for $1.50. Now I forgot to record it, but I just used a little bit of gray paint and I painted the buckle to make it look more like the one from the movie. Now the machete that I use is actually a real machete that I purchased at Walmart for just under $5. And it's the same machete that I actually used for my Part 6 costume. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of chestnut and pavement acrylic paint along with a bit of water to create a muddy water solution that I can apply to the sheath of the machete and make it look like it's been underwater for 30 years. Well, it's not as dark as I thought it was going to be, so I'll just add a little bit more pavement acrylic paint to the water solution to really give it that dark look that I'm going for. That actually turned out a lot better than I thought it was going to. The mix of the dark gray along with the brown really makes it look like it's muddy and it's been underwater for a long time. Alright, now for the survival knife. I picked this one up at Harbor Freight and it cost around $8. I started off by just spray painting the handle black before I moved on to the sheath. Now being as I wanted this to look pretty close to the one that's in the fan film, I actually wanted to put a sharpening stone and small snap on it so it could be a bit more accurate. I originally was just going to use some cardboard, but I came across this piece of foam that I had in my junk drawer. I'm not really sure where I got it, but it should work for what we want to do. And then I'm going to be using a section of the strap that actually came with the mask, and that's going to become the snap for the sharpening stone. So I'm just going to start off cutting a piece off of this foam, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of trim work just so that it looks a little bit better. And then being as it does have an adhesive back to it, I will stick it to the sheath. But I later did use some hot glue just to ensure that it wasn't going to fall off. So then I took the strap that actually came with the mask and I did cut a small section off. A little bit of hot glue, I went ahead and just placed it on. And it actually really doesn't even look that bad. Now sticking with the same process I did for the machete sheath, I'm going to do the same thing for this. I will start off with a more muddier brown look and then go over it a little bit later with that more deeper pavement gray. I really like the way it turned out for the machete, and I think it'll actually look good here. Okay, now for the dart pouch. Now I'm just going to be using a light tan crafting foam that I did pick up at my local fabric store, which cost about $1. I'm going to go ahead and measure out an 8 by 8 inch section, and then cut it out. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove 1 inch from one of the sides. Now save this 1 inch strip, we are going to use this later. Now using the leftover pieces of crafting foam, I'm going to measure out 3 pieces about 4 inches wide and approximately 7 inches long. Now for each pouch, I went ahead and made little markers on each side about 1 inch in. This is going to be my fold line. I'm going to go ahead and fold in 1 inch on one side and 1 inch on the other side. Therefore, each individual pouch will be approximately 2 inches wide. Now using hot glue, I'm going to go ahead and seal up one of the ends. And once the glue sets, I'll go ahead and glue it on next to the other pouch, and just repeat this process on the last one. Now that we get all 3 pouches, we can now take that 1-inch strip that we saved from earlier and cut it down so we can place it on the front of our dart pouch. Just using hot glue, go ahead and place a little down and then place it on top. Now to make a small loop so we can attach it to our belt. Now using a scrap piece of crafting foam, we're going to glue it to the back of the actual dart pouch. Now for the buttons that actually go onto the pouch, I couldn't find anything that actually looked close enough from the one from the movie, so I had to actually improvise. Back to the junk drawer, I was able to find several Lego pieces, which will actually work for what we need to do. Now it does look a little funny using Legos, but at least I'm making it a little more personalized. Now we're going to go ahead and dirty this up. I'm going to use some heavily diluted black paint and a small little rag and just kind of go over the entire dart pouch. I'm really going to emphasize going into the seams so it actually looks quite distressed and a bit weathered. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and move on to the hood. Now I had a lot of fun making this, and the video that I actually used to reference it was this one right here. This had a lot of detail that I absolutely loved. Now there's no way I'm going to be able to make it look this good, but I'll see what I can do. Now I started off using a balaclava that I picked up online for less than $1, and then I took a Sharpie, marked out where all the damage was, and all of the extra detail work, like exposed bone and teeth. Now I'm going to secure the balaclava to the dummy head using screws. This is going to ensure that it's not going to be moving around a whole lot when I apply the silicone to simulate the rotted flesh. Okay, so this is going to be the silicone that I'm going to be using. Now I absolutely love this particular brand, and it seems to be the only one that ever works for what I wanted to do. This is a 100% silicone, and anything less than that is not going to dry properly or adhere to the balaclava as well. Now even though this is a light gray silicone, I will be adding some gray acrylic paint and mixing it together. Using a pair of gloves, I'm going to put some silicone in the palm of my hand, and then add a little bit of that gray acrylic paint. I'm going to mix it up very thoroughly, and then apply it to the balaclava. Now I'm not going to be putting any silicone in the parts that I have marked out. That's going to have a different look entirely. So this will take quite a bit of time, and it is going to be extremely messy. So just be patient, it'll all come together at the end. So once I got about 90% done with the silicone, I'm going to be using this large black elastic hair tie that I picked up at the Dollar Tree, and this is going to go around the neck area. This stretches extremely far, so I'm not worried about any restriction while wearing this. I'm going to go ahead and mix up some more silicone and gray acrylic paint so I can put it over the hair tie. This is going to kind of cover it up, though it's not going to make it totally disappear. It's going to blend it in a little bit better than just leaving it black. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit more detail by making the silicone mix a little bit darker. And then I'm going to apply it around the neck area and a little bit on the front of the mouth and the top of the head. Now I'm just going to take my hand and just pat it over the entire hood, hitting the front of the mouth, the top of the head, and even some spots where I want to add a little bit more detail. I'm not looking for a solid color, I'm actually looking for inconsistency. This is supposed to be rotted flesh. So I'm going to let this dry overnight, and then I'm probably going to add a little bit more later on. So on the parts that didn't receive silicone, I'm going to be using this red Sharpie for some of the detail work. Some areas are going to be exposed bone, to where others are just going to be infected rotted flesh. For all of the exposed bone areas, I'm just going to do an outline on the edge. And for the infected rotted areas, I'm just going to fill it in completely. Okay, for the color of the teeth and the exposed bone, I'm just going to be using this toasted marshmallow acrylic paint. Alright, that doesn't look too bad. Now I'm going to start working on the exposed bone. I am going to continue using the small paintbrush, but in hindsight, I wish I would have used a larger one. This actually took quite a bit of time, and obviously if I used a larger paintbrush, I would have been done a whole lot sooner. Alright, now that we're all done with the painting, we're going to allow it to dry for a couple of hours. Even though the paint looks quite bright right now, once it does dry, it's actually going to darken up quite a bit, and it's going to take on more of a yellowish look. As you can see right here, once the paint actually did dry, it really does look extremely aged, and it looks like it has been exposed to the elements for the last 30 years. Alright, now moving on to the mask. Now the mask that I'm going to be using is just a cheap Chinese knockoff that I picked up on AliExpress.com, and I paid less than $1 for it. I went ahead and removed all the snaps and the strap, and proceeded to sand the mask. Once the sanding was complete, I took a pencil and marked out where all the cuts and damage needed to be on the mask. I did reference tons of photos online, and even watching the fan film a few times, just to make sure that it looked pretty close to what was represented on the screen. Alright, now using my Dremel, I'm going to proceed to create the damage to the mask, in all of the locations where I put the pencil lines. So the question's going to get asked, CS5, if you're actually making this costume on a budget, do you think it's very fair that you're using power tools when a lot of people don't have access to them? And the simple answer is, yeah, it's probably not that fair. But I've been using this Dremel for well over 15 years, and it is the most efficient way that I know how to create this mask. Now I have done this in the past with scissors, and it is quite difficult, but it is actually possible. So if you don't have access to a Dremel, a good pair of scissors, and a steady hand, you can actually create this mask. But what do you guys think? Is it fair that I use power tools on budget-friendly costumes? Or should I do it a more traditional way? Alright, so now the damage is complete, let's go ahead and paint the mask. Normally I'd actually use some acrylic paint and apply it directly to the mask, and in all honesty, it actually is the cheapest way to do it, but I found such a good deal on this smoky beige spray paint, I couldn't pass it up. Okay, after a couple coats of the smoky beige spray paint, and once it dried completely, it's now time to start doing some aging and weathering to the mask. I originally took a sanding block and went a little overboard as far as how much detail I actually wanted to integrate, but ultimately I really didn't like the result, so I ended up just painting over it anyways. Now using some diluted brown acrylic paint, I'm going to go over the entire mask to give it a dingy look. Now using some diluted black paint, I'm going to repeat the exact same process. The goal here is to make it extremely dirty and grimy. Now a little bit of red acrylic paint for the axe wound on the top of the head. Now using some moss green acrylic paint, you can really add those accents and extra details. Alright, now time to add the chevron. Now there is a couple different ways that you can do this. You can either use red masking tape, or you can purchase chevrons online. I chose to order mine online. Then I proceeded to cut it out, mark out wherever the damage needed to be, then cut out where I marked, and then just apply it to the mask. I'm now adding a little bit of diluted black and moss green on top of the chevron. It is way too shiny and we need to dull it up quite a bit. So after painting over those sanding block marks, I was extremely happy. I just used a little bit of chestnut acrylic paint and just went around and under the eyes, and it looks a whole lot better. Now I'm going to apply some black mesh to the inside of the mask to cover up the eye holes. Basically, I'm just going to be using some pantyhose that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. So I just cut out a few pieces, just a little bit bigger than the actual eye holes. And now just using some hot glue, I'm carefully going to glue it to the inside of the mask. And then just using my scissors, I'm going to trim off any excess. So the trim work isn't necessarily going to be perfect, but it is going to be on the inside of the mask, so no one's going to see it anyways. And so now just repeat the same process for the other eye. Alright, now that the mask is done, let's go and focus on the strap. I'm just going to be using a couple belts that I picked up at a yard sale, and I got both of them for $1. Now working with the first belt, I'm going to go ahead and lay it out, then make several marks along the back, so I know exactly where I need to trim it out. And now using a razor blade, I'm going to proceed to cut along the line. I'm just starting off making the strap approximately 1 inch wide, just so that I have a good understanding of how it feels to actually mark, cut, and actually stain. And then once I get comfortable doing that, I can actually do the final trim of the strap down to 3/4 of an inch. This is technically the first time I've ever used a leather strap for this particular mask, so I'm not actually sure what it's like to work with it, so I am going to take my time so I don't make too many mistakes. Now using some brown cafe shoe polish, I'm going to go over the entire belt. I'm going to go over the front, back, and even the sides. I want to make sure I have complete coverage to create a more uniformed look. Now I do understand that there is going to be some color differences with the sides and the back, but only one side is actually going to be showing, so I think we're going to be okay. Now to make the holes in the straps, I'm just going to be using a hammer and a nail and just a block of wood. So this should be pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go into any details. So to save a few bucks, I'm not going to be using any pop rivets to attach the strap to the mask, but instead I'm going to be using these paper fasteners. I was able to pick these up online for next to nothing. So now I just cut it to fit, and then just attached it to the mask. I did add some small foam spacers on the sides of the mask, just to make sure that I had enough room so when I actually put the mask over my head, it wasn't going to be too tight. Basically, I'm just going to repeat the same process for the strap that goes over the top of the head. Now using a paper fastener, I'm just going to attach the two straps. Now we're going to move on to the second belt. Now fortunately, we only need a small section of this particular one, and the reason why I actually did purchase it is because it was approximately 2 inches wide. I'm going to cut off a small section. I'm then going to mark out a couple indicator lines and mark out where the attachment holes need to be, and then just proceed to trim it up and then punch the holes. And then using a couple fasteners, attach it to the back of the strap. Alright, now that we verified that everything fit properly, I'm going to go ahead and remove the strap and then trim it up down to the 3/4 inch mark so it looks more like the one from the fan film. So yeah, that actually does look a whole lot more accurate. Okay, now we're going to switch over to the gloves. The gloves themselves I did pick up at a yard sale several years back for around 50 cents. And being as they were already weathered and damaged, I just added a little bit of brown and black acrylic paint just over the tops of them to make them look a whole lot dirtier. Alright, now for the boots. Now this is a pair of black work boots that I picked up at a yard sale for about $2.50, and they obviously look like they've seen some better days. There's a giant gash on the side of the boots, so these will no longer be good for any work applications, but for a costume, these will actually work out quite well. Okay, let's go ahead and tally up the cost and see how much I actually had to pay to create this costume. Not bad. All things considering, I'm going to classify this as a budget-friendly costume. Now, could I have made it a whole lot cheaper? Absolutely, but the quality and the look would be extremely compromised. And I loved making this costume so much, I really didn't want to sacrifice too much just to save a few dollars. Now again, it is a budget-friendly costume, but still, only spending around 50 bucks, I think this turned out amazing. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think of it? So if you have any suggestions for costumes you'd like me to make in the future, go ahead and let me know. And until next time, this is CS5 signing out, and I hope to see you in the next video.